They thought he was just another nobody dressed in worn shoes. Quiet, unassuming. But what they didn't know was that the man they mocked was a billionaire. Watching, listening, and planning his next move. This isn't just a story about fashion. It's a story about power, respect, and one man's mission to change an entire industry from the inside out. This is the rise of Elijah Grant. Elijah Grant didn't need the approval of others. As the founder and CEO of Meridian Capital Partners, he had long outgrown the need to prove himself. Still, that afternoon, when he stepped into Maison Lair, the city's most exclusive boutique, dressed in a plain navy sweatshirt and worn sneakers, he felt eyes shift toward him with a familiar chill. It wasn't new. Wealth, after all, didn't always wear its price tag. The boutique oozed opulence. Velvet-lined walls, custom lighting, and quiet classical music, all designed to make the right people feel at home. Elijah knew this. He had funded stores like these, but the staff didn't recognize him. Or rather, they didn't try. A young man named Kyle gave him a once-over, then leaned toward a coworker and whispered something followed by a chuckle. Priscilla, the manager, eyed him with a disinterest reserved for those deemed irrelevant. When Elijah asked if they had anything in his size, she glanced at his shoes and muttered, "Try clearance, if you're lucky." Moments later, a janitor's uniform was handed to him neatly folded, sarcastically suggested as budget-friendly. He didn't flinch. He accepted the uniform with a polite nod, thanked them, and left the store in silence. But something had shifted. That night, Elijah didn't sleep. He thought about the cashier who barely looked him in the eye, about the teenager in the corner who had smiled apologetically, Emma. Her name tag read. He thought about how deep-rooted the rot of judgment ran in the industry he had helped finance for decades. He had been called many things: visionary, tycoon, maverick. But that day, in the eyes of Priscilla and her staff, he had been nothing. By morning, he had made up his mind. When Elijah returned the next day, the transformation was complete. He wore a tailored Tom Ford suit, shoes that whispered money, and a watch that didn't just tell time, it told history. This time, the staff froze. Priscilla stumbled through a greeting, her voice brittle with forced politeness. Elijah didn't smile. "I'm Elijah Grant, CEO of Meridian Capital Partners," he said calmly. "I just acquired your store." Silence dropped like glass on marble. The only sound was the faint hum of air conditioning and the sudden, sharp intake of breath from Brent, one of the assistants, who had spent most of the previous day texting behind the register. Within the week, the Maison Lair boardroom was filled. Elijah stood at the head of the table. The senior leadership sat stiffly, unsure of what was to come. His legal counsel laid down contracts. Priscilla, Kyle, and Brent were summoned. "You're not being fired for poor sales," Elijah began. "You're being dismissed for systemic discrimination. The documents are ready. Sign or contest them in court. But be advised, this meeting is being recorded, and your behavior was witnessed by others." Priscilla's face drained of color. "But you tricked us," she stammered. "You came in dressed like a man who values character over labels," Elijah interjected. "You assumed who I was based on appearance. That assumption is now a matter of public record." Kyle lunged at a defense, suggesting they were just joking. Brent mumbled something about company culture. "No, this is not about jokes. This is about what happens when exclusion becomes routine," Elijah said. "That ends here." He could have walked away with a simple purchase, but Elijah had something bigger in mind. He restructured the company from the inside out. Maison Lair was reborn not as a boutique for the elite, but as a benchmark for ethical luxury. Elijah brought in designers from underrepresented communities. He replaced the hiring board. Pay was equalized. The hiring process was audited for bias. Transparency reports were released monthly. He even offered voluntary compensation packages for customers and former employees who had suffered discrimination. But not everyone welcomed the change. Former employees began speaking out. Lawsuits were threatened. Rivals in the luxury industry mocked the rebranding as a publicity stunt. Anonymous blogs claimed Elijah was trying to destroy the exclusivity that made fashion desirable. Then came the twist. A whistleblower, someone still inside one of Maison Laire's old partner firms, leaked documents showing collusion between executives to blacklist certain socioeconomic groups from their marketing campaigns. The scandal exploded. Elijah didn't blink. He went on national television, revealed the documents, and called for a congressional inquiry into discriminatory practices in luxury retail. His boldness sparked a national conversation. Suddenly, Elijah Grant wasn't just a billionaire. He was a movement. And through it all, he remained quietly close to Emma. She had been the only one at the store who had treated him with dignity that day. Her kindness wasn't loud, but it had been real. He promoted her first to manager, then creative lead. But what grew between them was not transactional. It was slow, thoughtful, and healing. Emma became the heart of the Maison Laire transformation. Her ideas shaped the storefronts, the messaging, the outreach. She reminded Elijah why he had started this in the first place, not just to punish, but to build. Months passed. Maison Laire became a case study in reinvention. Industry titans called it reckless. Consumers called it revolutionary. Elijah called it necessary. Then, in a quiet ceremony, he unveiled the Maison Academy, an institution dedicated to training future professionals in fashion, ethics, and respect. It was not about teaching style, it was about teaching substance. As he stood before the first graduating class, Elijah looked out at faces from every background, every walk of life. "You will inherit an industry that once closed its doors to you," he said. "Your job is to make sure it never dares to again." And with that, he stepped back not from leadership, but from the spotlight. Maison Laire would go on. The movement would grow. But his work, his real work, had always been about more than profit. It had been about people. And that, in the end, was what made Elijah Grant unforgettable.